All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode here. Excited today to go over this debate between Deepak Chopra and a Christian apologist by the name of Koukl. If you guys are joining me live, drop a comment, say what's up, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Excited to dive into this topic today. The inspiration for this topic actually came from I was in prayer yesterday in front of the Blessed Sacrament, praying about what I wanted to share today. And what came to mind was talking about the idea of the often misunderstood conception that science and religion are incompatible. And so I was praying about that and thinking about that and realizing or thinking about how much my perception of that has changed since my reversion, since I, had my own encounter with Christ and gave my life to Christ, repented of my past, and have come back to the Catholic Church, and have come to realize how much faith and reason go hand in hand. And my apologies if my voice is a little bit raspy. I'm still also recovering from, I've had this cough and cold for the past couple weeks. So I'm sipping on some tea. I don't normally drink tea, but still kind of recovering here. So bear with me. But also, hope you guys all had a very blessed Easter. Happy belated Easter. Hope you guys had a great Easter celebration. Easter was Sunday. Wednesday was my birthday, so I just celebrated my birthday as well. So it's been a week full of celebrations for me, and praise the Lord. God be praised. I have another year that I've made it around the sun. So back to the topic here. As I was praying and thinking about this idea of how faith and reason go hand in hand, science and religion go hand in hand, even though I think a lot of us, myself included, in the past have kind of been taught to believe that science and religion are contradictory. The truth is that they actually, there's a really great quote, actually, I'm going to pull up right now, from Pope John Paul II. And he says, I thought this was a great quote. Pope John Paul II says, "Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth, and God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, to know himself, so that by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves." And I also was just doing a little bit of research, and I will get to the debate in just a second. So as the title of this video says, again, there's this really great debate between this Christian apologist and, New Age guru Deepak Chopra. It's actually an old video, but again, as I was praying about this concept of faith and reason, I remembered coming across this video pretty early on after my reversion, and I thought it was just a great demonstration of how Christianity really is a faith of, it's a very reasonable faith, right? It's not a complete leap of faith, based purely, that's just purely based on faith. There's a lot of reason to support the faith as well. And I think, again, this is contrary to what a lot of us may have been raised to believe as we grew up, in the education system. For me, growing up in the public education system and then going on to, university, higher education, there's a very strong sort of anti-Christian rhetoric that, again, sort of places Christianity to be in opposition to science. And again, I think for me now, that's been completely collapsed. And I now see how not only is that not true, but actually so much of education and science was started by Christians and more specifically by Catholics. And so Yeah, I'm actually going to share my screen really quick and just share a little bit here. And again, if you guys are tuning in, say what's up. Teresa, what's up? Good to see you on. Anybody else that's joining live, say hello in the comments. But let's see, can you see my screen here? No, I don't think it's working. One second. All right, so there's the debate. We'll get to that in just a second. But just a quick recap here on science in the Catholic Church, and this is on Wikipedia, which also, from my understanding, Wikipedia also tends to have a more sort of a liberal take on things. But even the Wikipedia page on science in the Catholic Church, talks about how historically the Catholic Church has been a patron of the sciences. It's been prolific in the foundation and funding of schools, universities, and hospitals, and many clergy have been active in the sciences. Some historians of science, such as Pierre Duhem, credit medieval Catholic mathematicians and philosophers such as John, Nicole, and Roger as the founders of modern science. So yeah, fun fact, that was something I actually learned, I think, from Father Spitzer. If you're not familiar with Father Spitzer, I highly recommend checking him out. He's a brilliant priest, Catholic priest, who is just like an absolute genius intellectual. And I think it was at a talk I was attending where Father Spitzer was talking. He shared that that the Big Bang Theory and the scientific method were both invented by Catholic priests. And so, again, as I have continued in my own faith journey in the Catholic Church, learning more about the church's history and sort of dismantling these misperceptions that the Catholic Church and science are opposed to each other. And again, realizing here, as even the Wikipedia page says, that the Catholic Church teaches that science and the Christian faith are complementary, as can be seen from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And so here's a little excerpt from the Catechism. Though faith is above reason, there can never be any real discrepancy between faith and reason. And then let me just scroll down here. There was another part. So then, yeah, it gets into the theory of the conflict between the science and the church. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. I think one of the main things that people often bring up, right, is that the Galileo affair, the Galileo controversy, that's often used as an example of how the Catholic Church has tried to suppress science. And I won't get too into that right now, but my understanding from the research I've done, a little bit of research I've done on that specific controversy, it's often kind of spun and sort of blown out of proportion, not accurately reported on what actually happened there. So actually, I was actually reading this article here on Catholic Answers about the Galileo controversy. So maybe that might be something I'll go deeper into another day. But just to kind of wrap up this point here, which again, the church itself rejects, or is it, sorry, one second. The church itself rejects the notion of innate conflict. The Vatican Council declared that faith and reason are of mutual help to each other. So, yeah, so that's kind of the context here I wanted to share before we jump into this debate, which I think, again, is just a brilliant demonstration of the reasonableness of Christianity. And so if you don't know who Deepak Chopra is, he's one of the top New Age gurus. He's written a bunch of different books and sold millions of copies, made millions of dollars off of his books and his speaking. And anybody who's been, in the New Age space to any extent has most likely heard of him. And yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and play the first portion here.
Dr. Chopra, if you look at the four Gospels and you look at what Christianity historically is accepted as being the most accurate depiction of what Jesus said, did, and etc., you would concede that your conception of an impersonal God would contradict that. Is that right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It would.
Okay.
And, I disagree with Mr. Koukl that the four Gospels were, written at the time of Jesus' existence.
When do you think they were written?
according to all scholarly research, anywhere from 60 AD to 100 AD.
Yeah, at 62 AD, the book of Acts was finished. That was the account of the early church, and Paul was in prison at that time. We know when he was in prison. By secular history, it was in 62, okay? The book of Acts was written by Luke after he wrote his gospel. That means the gospel of Luke had to be written in the late 50s. All scholars say the gospel of Luke was not the first gospel, but rather Mark was the first gospel and possibly Matthew. So you have two other accounts written before the end of the second decade after the death of Christ. So by that reckoning, within 15 years, you have writings circulating about the life of Christ from people who experienced the very thing. That's good scholarship, and that's standard scholarship. Are there people out there on the fringes that say differently? Certainly, but that's not sound scholarship. I just gave a very good argument for early dating, and it's sound.
Okay, I read the recent Newsweek issue, which differed quite a lot from your account.
Consider the source. Newsweek and the Jesus Seminar, even those people who are considered very, very radical, even by liberal academic scholars on this issue, they don't draw from the right sources, quite frankly.
Okay, you must draw from the right sources.
No, there is a wide variety of sources to draw from that mainline evangelical and non-evangelical scholarship to draw from, and they didn't do that. I mean, I
Do
just
you
know the
agree
field.
that the King James Bible is like the 18th or 19th iteration since the year 313?
No, you have a misunderstanding about how translations take place. This is my field. The translation goes from the Greek into the English from the original manuscripts, and the original language was Greek. So you have one iteration from what I use now, like a New American Standard or an NIV Bible, and what was written then. One iteration, not 18 iterations. There have been other translations that they don't build upon.
And you really believe that Christ's version of the truth is the only version of the truth?
I think.
All right, so I'm going to pause there for a second. Hopefully you guys caught that. Mainly, I think this first portion, again, just like kind of completely obliterates this this argument that's always made by people to basically invalidate the Bible, right? The validity of the Bible, the historical accuracy of the Bible. This was actually one of the very first things that I personally looked into after my reversion, because again, I sort of had, I guess in a way, my first, encounter with Christ was a bit more of a metaphysical experience. And so again, that it was like this knowing that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, being filled with the Holy Spirit and somehow coming to that knowing, and that like just knowing. But then it was a process for me over the coming weeks and months to try to sort of make sense of it intellectually, right? So then it became a more intellectual process of, doing a lot of research and digging into the things that I all the stumbling blocks that I had, and one of them being this one that Mr. Chopra brings up right here, which is, again, basically claiming that the Bible is not historically accurate, claiming this sort of old wives' tale that there's been like 18 different iterations of the Bible, and so it's no longer even the same book that it originally was. And so all of these claims that you often hear, and again, that I used to believe myself without ever having actually done the research myself. But as soon as, again, I started to actually do the research, as the Christian apologist here, Greg, so eloquently explains, the Bible is actually one of the most historically accurate books that's ever been written, compared to other historical documents that the academic community generally accepts as reliable. The Bible is extremely credible from that regard, from an academic scholarly perspective. Of course, like he said, there might be some people on the fringes who would disagree, but the vast majority, there's a consensus that the Bible actually, based on the fact, as he talked about, that multiple books here were written within 20 to 30 years after Jesus' death, right? So between 50 to 60 AD, these books were written by eyewitness accounts, right? Jesus died in 33 AD, which means that between 20 to 30 years, within the same lifetime, these people who were alive during Jesus' time were already writing and had already completed some of these books in the Bible. And so on top of that, which he doesn't get into here, there's all this overwhelming archaeological evidence and things like that really support a lot of these things that the story of Jesus And again, to also just quickly note that the Bible is not necessarily a historical book, right? The Bible is made up of a bunch of different books, and each book is a different genre. And so it's really important just to have, right, the context when you're reading the Bible, what book you're reading, who wrote it, what was the purpose of it, to kind of have the full context and the full picture here. Teresa says, Chopra has a giant smirk on his face. Unfortunately, this will fall on deaf ears for Chopra. He'd need to be met with his own framework of worldview. Yeah. So anyway, that point I think was just, that point I think he just kind of very clearly again provides, right, logical reasoning and evidence to sort of debunk this argument that the Bible's had all these iterations and it wasn't it was written long after Jesus died. Like, that's just not true. So I'm going to go on and then I'll continue to pause as we go forward.
Jesus was right. I think if the Gospels are accurate,
So
and
just
they
go back here real quick, one
version
second.
of
So he's asking if he thinks that Jesus is actually the only truth here.
version of the truth is the only version of the
I
truth.
think Jesus
Yes,
was
absolutely.
right. I think if the Gospels are accurate, and they I have every reason to believe that they are in their broad salient details. And here's a man who claimed to be God, who claimed to be the only way of salvation, who clearly claimed to be the way of forgiveness of sin, and then controlled the forces of nature, raised the dead, healed the sick, cast out demons, predicted his own death and resurrection, and then raised himself from the dead. And eyewitnesses saw this. Now, if that really happened, and that's really the question here, then Jesus has tremendous credibility in my book. And frankly, I'm going to stick with Jesus Christ instead of with Deepak Chopra on this issue.
Yeah, but what if I showed you similar accounts in the East about other people?
Then I'd have to see whether the justification, if you are just as critical of the historical reliability of those documents as you are of the gospel accounts, and to see if those documents have as well attested evidence for their historical reliability as the gospel accounts. So far, I haven't seen that.
Well, I think personally both East and West were...
All right, so I'll pause there. So as was touched on in the comments, first of all, you can clearly just see also the difference in this back and forth here, that Chopra does have this sort of very prideful, arrogant tone, kind of expressing his contempt for this Christian guy here. Just in his tone and his words, it's just kind of very like dismissive. But yeah, I loved this next little segment here, where it's just such a clear double standard, right? Where he's so critical of, again, the historical reliability of the Gospels. And so he's very critical on that end. But then he brings up, well, there's these other Gospels in the East that, he's basically asking, like, what about those? And so, the response is, well, okay, if you can show me the same level of historical reliability and be just as critical of those Gospels, right? These are, I forget what they're called. They're like the lost Gospels or whatever that people claim, were taken out of the Bible. But they're completely different. They don't align with the rest of the story. And so to, again, this guy, Greg's point here, if you're going to be that critical of the four main Gospels that are, considered by all Christians, like these are the true Gospels, then apply that same level of critical, assessment to these other Gospels. And of course, that's never done, right? Like, it's like these other, again, I forget what they're called, but I know what he's talking about, these other Gospels that are, if anybody's in the comments can remember what they're called, feel free to drop it in the comments. But yeah, it's just a double standard where, again, that level of critical assessment is only applied in one direction. And if you actually look at the, again, those other Gospels, there's nowhere near the level of credibility and validity as there is with the four Gospels. All right, I'm going to go on.
Versions of God are mostly mythical and not historical.
Does it come down to the issue of truth, Dr. Chopra, that can we or can we not know the truth about God?
I think in a certain state of awareness, when we can experience deep stillness within us, we can get a great taste for it. But I don't think we can, in the relative, ever know the truth unless we are willing to embrace our own uncertainty and take that leap of faith and say, I'll trust the unknown because of what I've experienced. But, my faith doesn't come from a book.
Okay.
Not even mine.
Well, just
Great response.
the idea of truth is diametrically opposed to taking a leap of faith. Listen, Lee, if you can't know what the truth is on things in general, you will not survive 24 hours. Everybody who gets in a car, everybody who takes medicine, everybody who walks out the door has to have some way of assessing what the truth is.
But
Now,
a lot
these
of
kinds
people
of
have
questions,
religious truth that's so different.
Well, this is
Why
the question
has
is whether
this
it's
version
truth or
got
not.
to be the only one that's true?
I'm not arguing right now that this one is the only one that's true. What I'm trying to argue is that they can't all be true. And just because you have people who have different conceptions of truth doesn't mean that all conceptions of truth are equal.
But they're
If
as
people have a
much-
different conception of truth, then obviously they could be mistaken.
They're as fervently convinced as you are. That
That's
their
right.
version is
That's why
true.
it doesn't matter how fervent a person is. What matters is the reasons he has for believing what he believes.
All right, I'm going to pause there as it goes to a commercial or an ad. So this part, again, so good because basically, this is also, again, the classic argument that every person who's in the New Age space and that I used to always say as well.
Not just a deck of cards.
One second. Which is basically just this, it's almost like this, and I have so much empathy for it, honestly, because it's like, there's this frustration, right? Like why, Deepak Chopra literally just said it. He said, why does it have to be that that's the only one that's true, right? It's like, it's this resistance that there's only one way, that Jesus Christ is the only way. I think that's probably the biggest, biggest argument or resistance to Christianity. And it definitely was, even after, if I'm being completely honest, even after my own, encounter with Christ and giving my life to Christ, it was still something that like I kind of struggled with a little bit to now, submit my intellect and my will to believe that this is the only way, and that everything else is false, right? Everything else is, it's either of the God of the Bible or it's not. And so that argument that Greg makes here, that they can't all be true, and Chopra saying like, or actually I love that he clarified, like he's not even trying to make the argument right now that Christianity is the only way, but if we can't agree that they can't all be true, because obviously there's clear contradictions in all the different, religions and faiths out there. And it doesn't matter how fervent a person is, how convinced a person is. At the end of the day, only one of them can be true, right? So that's kind of I think the framing that he's setting up here, right? Is that, all right, can we just agree that they can't, it's impossible for them to all be true. So I'll keep going from here.
Talking about your concept of God, and we got into the Jesus issue and a little bit of clarity between the difference of opinion between you and Mr. Koukl. You had said that you carry around the Sermon on the Mount, which Jesus delivered, in which he did some of his teaching, and yet Greg was saying that there are other teachings of Jesus concerning judgment, concerning sin, and so forth, that you don't subscribe to. So how can you kind of pick and choose what you want to take from Jesus and mix it with other people's viewpoints? Doesn't that contradict itself there?
The King James version of the Bible is about the 19th iteration. If you go look at the history of Christianity, Western Christianity began about 313 AD when King Constantine decided to adopt it for political reasons. There are versions of Christianity that are quite different. St. Paul went west and then others went east. And even amongst Christians, there are a wide variety of ideas about what Christ said or did not say. We have no direct evidence of what he said because the Gospels, even the four Gospels, were written long after the death of Christ. And there are other Gospels which we are more familiar with in the East, and we have a tradition of really having reverence for Christ as a messenger of God, but not the only messenger of God. And all I can say is that's the worldview I was brought up with.
Yeah. Well, that basically all he said is that there are different points of view with regards to Jesus and other religions, which to me is quite obvious. The question is, how do we know the right answer about any of these kinds of things? You go back to the primary source documents that give you the information about those people. Dr. Chopra is just mistaken in his assertion that that we don't have a good record of the life of Jesus. Actually, Lee, you've done tremendous work on this yourself. There is tremendous, powerful scholarship that demonstrate that the Gospels were written early and not late, that they represent eyewitness reports, and they give us a reasonably accurate view of what Jesus actually said and what he did. And these are the important situations, these are the important details that I'm talking about here. Because people have differences of opinion about it doesn't mean that nobody can possibly know. He said, Dr. Chopra said earlier, who's to say? Well, the answer is the person with the best reasons gets to say. You look at the writings and you see if somebody's accurately represented them. I could take some of the things that Dr. Chopra has said today, and I could isolate them and characterize him as a fundamentalist Christian who believes exactly as I do. If I were to do that, he would consider himself ill-abused, and he'd be right. But we think nothing about doing the same thing with Jesus, isolating those things that fit into our worldview and make Jesus into somebody like us, rather than letting him be himself. By the way, Christians do this as well. It seems manifestly clear in any record of what Jesus had to say that Jesus wasn't a Hindu mystic. He didn't believe in cosmic consciousness. He was a Jew. He was a monotheist. He was a Jewish rabbi. He held to the Old Testament, and he made some corrections in people's misunderstandings. But his worldview was a Jewish biblical worldview and not a Hindu worldview. And we would be well to read Jesus' statements in light of that if we're going to take him seriously. One of the reasons we quote Jesus, and Dr. Chopra does as well, because Jesus is someone to be contended with. If he is, we should listen to him carefully and be very careful that we get his statements right.
Okay, Dr. Chopra?
So good. I'm just going to reiterate one thing he said there, right? Different opinions, again, doesn't mean that no one can possibly know. I think that's the ideal is like, well, can't everybody just have their own opinions and can't everybody be right? And the answer is no, like everybody can't be right. There has to be, if you believe, right? I think again, the hypothesis, I guess, here has to be that if there is an absolute truth, right? And if you don't believe that there's an absolute truth, then, then we can't even have a conversation about truth in the first place. But if there is an absolute truth, then everybody can't possibly be right. And so, of course, what we have to do is do our best to truly dig into the evidence, right? To use our intellect and our reasoning and rationale and logic to follow the evidence where it leads us. This is a phrase that I remember I heard from Stephen Bancarz in one of his videos saying, to be truly open-minded, right? Because often the New Age space is all about being open-minded and, wanting to, again, be open to all ideas and perspectives. But he gives this other definition. He says to be truly open-minded is to follow the evidence where it leads, regardless of how it makes you feel. So I'm going to keep going. We're almost done here.
What about people who are not Christians? What about them? Are they damned to go to hell forever?
Well, the answer to this is very simple in a broad sense. I mentioned earlier that reality has a way of bruising people who don't take it seriously. Whether I'm right or whether you're right in our respective views, there are consequences to people who get it wrong. If you're right and I get it wrong, I'm going to be hurt by that, Dr. Chopra. If I'm right and you get it wrong and others get it wrong, then they can be hurt by it as well. I'm just simply saying there are consequences. If what Jesus said is right, then there are serious consequences for unbelief, because everybody will stand before God and give an account for their life and be properly tried for the crimes that they committed against God. Now, maybe Jesus is wrong. Maybe you're right. But if you're right, I'm going to miss out. There are consequences for getting the truth wrong. And this is why I'm emphasizing we have to be very careful about the truth issue.
See, the difference between you and me is you're certain and I'm not. That's all. And my uncertainty I'm willing to embrace, and I'm comfortable with my uncertainty, and you seem to know the truth. So that's our essential difference. And when I talk to Islamic people, they're very certain about their point of view, and so are the Hindu fundamentalists, and so that's where the problem is.
Okay, this to me, and I don't at all mean to be unkind, Dr. Chopra, but this
No,
sounds
you
like
can be.
This is, but I don't mean this, but I think that was a disingenuous remark. You must have 8 or 10 titles that have sold hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of copies of
Millions,
books,
yeah.
in which you are telling people what you think the world is like, and you are enjoining them to believe their way. Nobody in his right mind would, you're enjoining them to believe like you, and nobody in their right mind would do that unless they were reasonably convinced their view was correct. If they weren't, then you have no right to tell people
I'm not enjoining people to believe in a certain way. I'm just expressing a worldview. That's all.
Yes, but
If
your
you
book is
notice
called The
my
Way of
books,
Peace, isn't it?
They're endorsed by Christians, by bishops, by people
enough.
all over the world. And, some people agree with me and a lot don't.
Right, but if they don't agree with you, you probably
You
think
can't
they're
impose
mistaken.
your values on me, and I don't want to impose my values on you.
Someone pause there. I love that part. Actually, I want to go back because I think I skipped over it for a second,
By
but I wanted
Christians,
to
by
pause.
bishops, by
Fair enough. And joining them
was
to
it?
believe that there are 10 titles that have sold.
Here we
But
go.
I don't mean this, but I think that was a disingenuous remark. You must have 8 or 10 titles that have sold hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of copies of
Millions,
books.
yeah.
In which
I love that he has to correct him there that it sold millions of copies, and it's kind of proving his point though. He's like so pridefully, he's like, yeah, it's millions, not hundreds of thousands. He's sold millions of copies, and his point is that, if you're so uncertain, right, then why are you clearly he must have a certain level of certainty in order to be writing this many books and selling this many millions of copies, trying to propagate his worldview, right? Otherwise, why would you share your worldview if you don't want people to align with your worldview? And so, or if you don't have at least a certain level of certainty with your own worldview. So kind of just, highlighting his own sort of irrationality there, right? With claiming to be uncertain and comfortable with his uncertainty, and yet here he is making millions of dollars, selling millions of copies of his books and his philosophies and all of these things. And then the last thing is just again about the consequences for getting the truth wrong, right? I think I talked about it in one of my last videos. I think it was in the video about how no one taught me that Satan can masquerade as an angel of light. I mentioned, I think I briefly mentioned at one point in that video that anytime there's a misalignment between your perception of reality and actual reality, that's going to create dysfunction. That's going to create damage and destruction in your life and the lives of people around you. That was, again, definitely my experience in the New Age, right? So it became so self-delusional and was living in my own reality, in my own, self-created reality that was not in alignment with the truth of reality. And again, the result of that, that led me to a very, very dark place and, destructive place. How much time is on here? 2 minutes. Actually, yeah, I'll just go ahead and play the final 2 minutes, and then we'll start to wrap up.
you are telling people what you think the world is like, and you're enjoining them to believe their way. Nobody in his right mind would, you're enjoining them to believe like you, and nobody in their right mind would do that unless they were reasonably convinced their view was correct.
No,
if they weren't, then you have no right to tell people
I'm not enjoining people to believe in a certain way. I'm just expressing a worldview. That's all.
Yes, but
if
your
you
book is
notice
called The
my
Way of
books,
Peace,
I
isn't
mean,
it?
they're endorsed by Christians, by bishops, by people
enough.
all over the world. And, some people agree with me and a lot don't.
Right, but if they don't agree with you, you probably
You
think
can't
they're
impose
mistaken.
your values on me, and I don't want to impose my values on you. And, when you say I'm being disingenuous, that's not true. Absolutely not true. In fact, I talk about the wisdom of uncertainty in all my books.
My only point about disingenuity in this regard was that you say that you're open and you're not certain, but that seems unusual to say when somebody writes so many books that enjoins and encourages people to embrace his beliefs.
I talk about uncertainty all the time. I talk about an evolving worldview. I talk about the fact that science is discovering that at the heart of creation, there is omniscience, there is omnipresence, there is omnipotence. But I cannot conceptualize that in somebody who's a person who has been squeezed into the volume of a body and comes from a particular ethnic background.
Okay, well, you can't conceptualize that, but since you're uncertain, it might be the case then, because maybe you could be wrong, as you said, that this point of view is the correct view, even though it's hard for you to conceptualize that the things that Jesus said taken
But
as a
you
whole...
seem to be very sure that your point of view is correct,
Well,
aren't you?
I'm pretty confident, but that's because I've looked carefully...
Good luck.
And that's
Good
because I've
luck.
looked
So are the
carefully...
Islamists, so are the Hindus, so are the Jains, so are the Zoroastrians.
This is precisely why psychological confidence isn't enough. You need more than psychological confidence. You need good reasons to support that. And this is why a lot of work that I've done and Leah's done as well is to give reasons for faith. So we're not taking a jump, a leap of faith. It's not religious wishful thinking, but we are trying to build knowledge based on good rationale.
If the price of...
So, yeah, I thought that was a good ending as well. So this is just a 12-minute clip from the full interview. I put the link to the full interview in the description. I think it's a 36-minute is the full interview. But that last part again, I think Chopra is admitting, right, like that he can't conceptualize that Jesus Christ is truly God, right? And it is very difficult to conceptualize, right? I think again, I can empathize with him, and anybody who might, have similar thoughts or beliefs about Jesus, about Christianity. But this is the point, right? Is that again, truth, and God, and these, these topics that we're talking about here. Again, if you're going to truly be open-minded, right? This is, the irony of people who are always talking about being open-minded, and they're open-minded to everything except Christianity, right? And so, and of course, the question is, well, why is that, right? And I think that the answer is obvious, right? Because the devil wants people to. The devil doesn't care how he gets you or what he uses to take you away from Christ. His only job, his only mission is to take you away from Christ. And so as long as, through whatever means or whatever path or whatever faith or whatever, whatever ways that he can do that, he will do that. And so, like Greg said to Chopra at the end here, just because it's hard for you to conceptualize that, that doesn't mean that it's not possible, right? That doesn't mean that it's not the truth. And so I'll just leave that as a kind of a final, some final food for thought for anybody who, might be on the fence or possibly, right, coming out of New Age or starting to explore Christianity. And again, for me, it was such a big realization to start to realize the truth that, again, to kind of zoom out for a second, that Christianity is not in opposition to science or to reason, and actually, right, the two really complement each other. I think it's Father Schmitz who says, right, that science explains the what and the what and how, but religion explains the who and why, right? So they're just answering different questions, right? Science does not disprove God or Christianity, and so. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys found that valuable. Teresa says, this sounds like Chopra is gaslighting. I used to listen to his guided meditation albums that reprogrammed the mind with spiritual truth. This is quite literally thought reform. That is not inviting people to consider his worldview whatsoever. Yeah, that's a great point. Again, he's saying one thing, right, which is that, oh no, I'm just expressing my opinion. I'm not trying to, convince anybody of my worldview. Of course he is, right? You wouldn't write multiple books and, have all these different programs and meditations if you weren't trying to, persuade people and convince people that this is the correct worldview. And that's just, that's human nature, right? That's what we're always doing. Whatever you believe to be true and correct, you're going to do your best to convince other people of that. But of course, it's a whole another thing when you're now writing, multiple books and making millions of dollars off of it. Obviously, he's very, very heavily invested in this worldview, which again makes it very difficult for someone like him to be able to be open to hear anything that was kind of presented in this debate. And as was mentioned in the comments, it kind of falls on deaf ears. But, we got to pray for Chopra and all the other New Age gurus that, that the Holy Spirit will touch them, that God will soften their hearts, and that, that they can be saved, that they can repent of their ways and turn to Christ and start to, use their influence for the kingdom of God and not for their own selfish, self-interested reasons, right? Not for their own kingdom. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you guys thought of this sort of reaction video. This was kind of my first time doing that. So, I hope that, that just kind of came to mind as a good demonstration to sort of present, again, this contrary to what, again, I think a lot of us were maybe raised to believe. For me, I was actually, again, raised in the Catholic Christian faith in my home, but outside of the home, right, in my school, in education, in the education system, in university, right, I was then sort of, brought into the belief that that Christianity and religion was for, non-intellectual people, for unintelligent people. And so I think there's a strong case to be made, and I think we need to talk about it more. This was partially inspired as well from somebody who messaged me on Instagram to again try to present to those people who might be on the fence, who might be thinking though that that Christianity is not that it's just kind of the stereotypical I don't know, like the stereotypical like redneck Bible thumpers who don't have an education and are just sort of regurgitating these mythical stories, which again is completely contrary to the truth. And again, the more you study the church history and you study the early church fathers and these great intellectuals and philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, it really starts to be revealed how beautifully rich and both mystical and intellectual the Catholic faith is. So with that, thank you guys again for tuning in. Make sure to, 1 second here. Still getting used to the tech here. What am I trying to do? Make sure to hit that like button. If you did like this video, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. Really helps these videos get out and reach more people. So again, if you benefited from this, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and God bless you all, and I will see you in the next video.